Welcome to the Answer is Yes podcast, where we interview some of the most interesting people that have said yes to opportunities in their life. We hope that through these stories you can learn to create your own destiny by saying yes along the way. Join us as we explore the new series covering topics such as passion, integrity, and hard work. I'm your host, Jim Riley, and I hope you enjoy these interviews as much as I do. I believe that everyone has an important message worth hearing. Today I sit down with Jack Linscott. He's my grandfather, by the way, but he's also a 95-year-old World War II veteran. I'm so proud to be interviewing him today. And if you have the patience to listen to one of my longer shows, I think this is filled with so much history and quality information about the United States, where we were in the 20s and 30s. But not only that, also a lot about life, living, being married for 72 years, going through the war, going through depression, owning several businesses, starting new businesses, and being an entrepreneur and an inventor. And he's lived such a rich life, and he's not slowing down. And I'm very, very proud to be bringing this interview to all of my listeners as well as my family. Because, I think oftentimes we take for granted that somebody's always going to be there. And as I suggest in the interview, my grandfather will probably outlive me, even though he's 95 and I'm in my 50s. But just an incredible time for me to hear his story and to share it with you. So please sit back. You probably have to break this one into a couple listenings, but please enjoy this history lesson and the story of Jack Linscott. Hello and welcome to the Answers Yes podcast. Today I probably have my most important interview of my show. I've got my grandfather, Jack Linscott, and we are at his house in Newport Beach, California. Grandpa Jack, thank you for making the time to do this today. I know I sprung it on you, and I thought that I was going to be the big interview for you, and then you informed me that four Marines are naval officers.
Marines.
4 Marines from the Pentagon were just here last week to interview you. So I guess that's much better than my interview. But I'm so proud of you and impressed by the people that have reached out to you and what you're doing. So thank you for making some time for me to interview you.
Well, Jim, I did enjoy, and it was a privilege and an honor to be interviewed by the Pentagon. But in my eyes, I'm a family man. And to have my children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren proud of me, it means much more to me that you come and interview me. That, to me, is the greatest honor in the world because I know that you're doing it because you respect me.
Yeah. Well, I've procrastinated interviewing you because it's one of those interviews that I wanted to do since I started this podcast a year ago. We now have over 100 shows and 20,000 downloads, and I realized today that I needed to record you and hear your story. You're 95 years old. You lived through the Depression, World War II, first man on the moon, Vietnam, Korea, and everything else in between. And, my show is for other people to hear our stories and maybe learn from them and make career decisions. And oftentimes, career decisions are just made on what's happening in your own lives or maybe what's happened historically. And I would love for you to tell my listeners a little bit about your background, starting from when you were a child, because you grew up during the Depression and your entrepreneurial days started then. So if you don't mind, can you tell us a little bit about your childhood and some of the things that you were involved with at that age, and maybe bring us through that part of your life?
Well, Jim, I belong to the Freedom Committee of Costa Mesa and the Living History Program, and I get great satisfaction in speaking at the schools. And I don't like to be put on a show, but I do love to go to the children and speak with them. And because they're young, they're impressionable, and there's so much false information out there today. I want to be able to say that one day when they get into college and someone would give them in a discussion in the class and say something, and they could stand up and say, "Wait just a minute. I talked to someone that was actually there, and he told me this." And they could use that information if they like or not. You can close that screen door.
We didn't want the dog to get out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, she doesn't travel well. She's 6 pounds. She wouldn't last too long.
So you're speaking at the high schools, and you've been on this program for some time now, and I know you're doing an incredible job. Tell us what it was like during the Depression. And, you know, a lot of people probably don't even know what that term is, but you do because you lived through it.
Well, I'm going to inform you and them about this right now. I was born in Indianapolis, Indiana, in the last day of the year, 1924. Grover Cleveland, I believe, was president at that time. That kind of gives you an idea how long ago it was, history-wise. And I was like a little Lord Fauntleroy. My sister and I were born into a rather successful family. My father was head upholstery for Stutz Motor Company in Indianapolis, Indiana. And also, he had the largest filling station, as we used to call them, gas stations in Indianapolis, and also a barber shop that catered to just children.
Mm-hmm.
So we rarely saw him because he was always out taking care of his business because he was an entrepreneur. My mother was ill. She had a mastoid, something with a bone in her ear, and she couldn't take the cold, and she was living in the wrong place for that. So we rarely saw her. She was in the upstairs in the back of the house. So I was raised by a nanny, a black lady, a beautiful, rather heavy-set, bosomy woman. She wore a bandana red like Aunt Jemima, and she carried us kids around the house on her bosom. We could just sit there, and you felt like you were getting lost in a cushion. We loved her to death, and she actually raised us. So until I was about 6 years old, I had the world by the tail. And then, because I wasn't old and had no idea what was going around me, I learned at a later date that the stock market had crashed, and people had lost their jobs. My dad had lost his job, lost his 2 businesses, and the money that we had in deposits for our business, like doing a DBA, was lost because they locked the banks and you couldn't get your money out. We didn't have savings insurance back in those days. So the next thing I knew, I looked around and my nanny was gone. No explanation, but quite a shocker for me because she was like my mother. Then there was just seemed like our household had changed overnight. There was a lot of arguing, indecision, not knowing what to do. So all I know is that we got in a car one day, and a big old touring car, had a canvas bag over the radiator with water in it and a big tow rope and our possessions on top of the car. And we headed for California because that was a warm climate for my mother. So that there had been there or Arizona, we ended up in California. We traveled the Old Ridge route, and that was like 2 lanes, 1 lane each direction with no shoulder on the road. That's why we carried the big rope so that we could tow people out. And it was you help me, I help you, and we were very successful at that because everyone needed everybody else. So we ended up in California. No place to eat along the way. There were no restaurants, no fast food, and no motels, or we called them back in those days, or auto courts. No luxuries at all. We slept on the ground at night, and we ate egg sandwiches all the way to California. My mother made fried egg sandwiches on white Wonder Bread. So really about the first white sliced bread that there ever was came on the market at that time. And that was great until after about the 4th day. And then if you opened that can of fried egg sandwiches that knock your head off, the smell of those rotten eggs. But we made do, and I don't remember much about the trip. I didn't mind it too much because I didn't know. It seemed like for me, every day was a new experience. I had had no experiences when I was a little boy because mostly I was confined to the house. So we arrived in California, not knowing where we were or what we were going to do. But we ended up in Pico, California, which from Newport Beach is about 20 miles north, up near the mountains, towards the mountains. And we were between the San Joaquin and the San Gabriel River. There was no buildings to speak of, just a few sparse buildings, but it looked like what we consider a homeless place down along L.A. or the Anaheim or San Francisco. Tents, cardboard boxes, people living underneath bridges. Nobody had any money. Nobody had a job. It was pretty much on a barter. We'd put little signs up all over town. I do electricity, and if you need electrical work done, I will trade my labor to you, and you do something for me that I need. No money ever changed hands, and we'd exchange. First, we had rabbits and chickens, and I had a cow. So I would milk the cow, and I'd give my neighbor a gallon of milk, and she'd give me 6 eggs from her chickens. So it was strictly barter. None of us went hungry. We didn't necessarily have a great choice of food. Nevertheless, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. I was enjoying every child's dream of not having too many responsibilities. Every day was a fun day. There were just a few little chores I had to take care of, like milking the cow and feeding chickens and stuff like that, which had to be done every day. Now, I learned something from life back then. I learned that there are certain things that have to be done in a timely manner. That chickens and rabbits have to be fed every day at a certain time. Cows have to be milked. You can't milk a cow one day and then wait 4 days and milk her 4 times. That doesn't work. So you have to do things in a timely manner. Time is of the essence. There's certain little things that I think we learned back in those days that took us through life, and I'm sorry that the children today don't learn those manners. Those habits. I know that we learn to say, yes, sir, no, ma'am, and we respected authority, and we respected the law. A policeman or a fireman was great, and we just thought they were the most wonderful people in the world, because all of us kids as boys want to grow up to be firemen or cowboys or policemen, and the girls wanted to be nurses. So that was our childhood pretty much. For enjoyment, of course, we had no toys. So climbing trees, a big old tree, and shimmying across on the big branches and hanging upside down to see the world from upside down and what that looked like. And the old branch of an old tree went over a shed, and we put sunflower seeds up there and tar from where they worked on the street to repair the cracks in the street. And the sun would ripen the sunflower seeds and soften the tar. We chewed the tar and we shared the sunflower seeds for the birds, and that was fine. I had a toy. It was a tire with a stick to push it down the street to keep it moving. And we had a swimming hole in the San Gabriel River where every day we took our bath. We weren't the cleanest kids. Mostly we were a bunch of dirty little kids. If you remember the little rascals from Disneyland, Spanky and Alfalfa and the rest of them, well, we were that gang. So if you wonder what we were doing,